Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, as you probably heard last Friday, and I bet was discussed on this show, Don Lemon has been arrested and charged in connection with his decision to join a group of anti-ICE protesters who entered a church in St. Paul, Minnesota, and interrupted services in order to protest the pastor, who they alleged was aiding government efforts to detain illegal immigrants. Lemon has claimed he is merely a journalist who is covering a notable event, not involved in it. Indeed, it is very important to protect the First Amendment rights not just of journalists, but of anyone practicing journalism. The problem, of course, is that the First Amendment only protects your behavior vis-a-vis the government. It does not give you the right to trespass on private property and interfere with the First Amendment rights of other people. Nor is journalism some special category of employment that gives you extra rights. You can't participate in an illegal action and then wave your badge and say, "It's okay for me, I'm a journalist." You can arrest these other people for committing crimes, but not me. Of course, that's not how it works. All that said, the government must prove its case that Lemon actually broke the law, that he knew precisely what the protesters were planning, participated in it, and was involved in the effort to disrupt the service. He did not merely opportunistically report on what was happening there. Here's what he had to say for himself following his release.
I want to thank everybody for their support. It truly means the world to me. I have no idea what's going on because obviously I haven't seen anything. I have spent my entire career covering the news. I will not stop now. In fact, there is no more important time than right now, this very moment, for a free and independent media that shines a light on the truth and holds those in power accountable. Again, I will not stop now. I will not stop ever.
Now, Lemon is receiving tons of support from liberal commentators, mainstream journalists, and even the independent-minded Stephen A. Smith came to his defense. Here was that.
And whether you like it or not, Don Lemon is a member of the press. Don Lemon has been in journalism for 30 years, if not more. Don Lemon worked at CNN for 17 years. And just because you don't have a specific organization that you're working for, that's where the word independence comes from. It doesn't mean that your journalism credentials are stripped. Not when you've been doing it for decades like him. Let's understand that. This is straight what he's going through. I'm a member of the press too. And there ain't no way in hell anybody in the field of journalism shouldn't be supporting Don Lemon today.
Again, though, I have to point out journalists are not special or different, and free speech rights do not apply to them uniquely or excessively or in any different way. Don Lemon has the exact same rights and status as anyone else doing the same thing. Same goes for Stephen A. Smith. Now, I take my cues, as always, from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a legal advocacy group that defends the First Amendment in court. In a statement, FIRE writes that they are following the case very closely. Quote, journalists do not have a special license to break generally applicable laws. When the pastor of City's Church asked Lemon to leave, he no longer had the right to stay. FIRE recently explained that the First Amendment does not protect the protesters' act of commandeering private property for their own ends, even if they did so to send a political message. Not only is such conduct unprotected, but it interferes with others' ability to exercise their own rights to free speech and freedom of religion. But that doesn't mean the federal government's charges against Lemon, civil rights charges that require evidence he was threatening or physically obstructing congregants or coordinating such activity, are warranted, end quote. Meanwhile, Attorney General Pam Bondi says they've got Don Lemon on video obstructing one of the parishioners and preventing her from leaving. Here was the AG.
Some of the lucky women ran out the side door, falling on the ice, legs up in the air. One woman hurt her arm so badly she had to go to the hospital. Parishioners were blocked from exiting the church. Don Lemon, on video, blocked one of them, screaming, yelling at the pastor. That's illegal in this country. When we say God bless America, we mean it. We're going to protect America. And if you do that in any house of worship in this country, we're going to find you. We're going to indict you, and I'm going to prosecute you.
Now, we will see whether the government has the evidence to prove its case.
You know how I feel about this. You
I don't
have to
think-
guess. Well,
I'm-
you could just take a wild guess. I think this is ridiculous and embarrassing for our country. I'll say it again.
Really?
Don Lemon is a journalist, right? Don Lemon was there to report on a story of national importance. Don Lemon is somebody who wanted an exclusive story, so he used his sources to meet up with a group of protesters that traditionally use their First Amendment right to protest events that they don't like. And he followed them, and he even said, we're going somewhere. I don't have much information. I can't really tell you more. I'm going to follow this group. And he followed them to a church. There's nothing barring somebody.
I mean, he
with a
said he
camera.
wouldn't share the information.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
He gave
to you? So we're
every indication that he knew
No,
what they
it's
were
not.
doing.
That's because you say, Robbie. That's because you say. And I also just think
Because it's on video.
no, but you're interpreting what he means by the way that he spoke or the inflection in his voice, and that's what they're prosecuting him off of. I don't think that's enough. Two judges
They're
refused.
prosecuting him for obstructing someone from leaving.
So the one person that Pam Bondi's saying she has on
Yeah.
tape, show the tape. Because I don't trust anything that Pam Bondi says. So show the tape.
All right, well,
Two
that's what we're gonna
judges.
do. I mean, I agree with you that they shouldn't be able to just have him locked up without presenting evidence.
Right, I'd like to see this. And
Well,
so
we're gonna
two
see the
judges
evidence.
refused to sign this warrant, I think, for a reason. And we know the administration continues to say if somebody speaks out against them or a political enemy, they're going to move forward and try to find charges like they've done with Letitia James, which aren't warranted. And I think when you talk about the attack on the press that people are talking about, we know that the FBI just searched the home of an Associated Press journalist because they were trying to find the connection to what was happening with the Pentagon contractor that released information. And so when we have a series of events, and I can go down a list of the way that the federal government has been attacking journalists, but those are the two most recent ones. And now Don Lemon, I think you should call out the administration and say this is a political vendetta. This is not something that we want to see. I think we should say this is vengeance towards Don Lemon. We know Don Lemon is not afraid of the president. He says whatever he wants to the president. And also, I hate the conversation about the FACE Act. So the FACE Act protects places of worship. It also protects abortion clinics and stops people from going in and protesting and obstructing
private
people.
property.
Yes, but let's talk about in January 2025, President Trump pardoned 23 anti-abortion activists convicted under the same FACE Act for blockading abortion clinics. They were actually activists, not journalists. And he
There's no
pardoned all
difference.
23 of them.
Activists and journalists have the same rights.
Okay, but he pardoned.
There's no difference.
But what's the policy then? He pardoned 23 activists using the FACE Act, saying they're good to protest in an
Charges
abortion
against
clinic.
them were probably BS.
No, okay, the charges here are BS. My point. So stay consistent. If we're going to use
No,
the FACE Act,
I'm
the
being
president
consistent.
must stay
I think
consistent.
those charges were probably BS.
They're probably BS. Again,
Probably,
you're
yes.
overgeneralizing something that you
I
have no
don't think
information.
because I've seen I've seen the anti-abortion protesters.
And I've
outside
seen these
clinics.
protesters.
They don't
Don Lemon
prevent
was
people
asking
from
questions.
going in. That's liberal nonsense that they don't have any right. No, they have every right to be outside Planned Parenthood and protest and say whatever they want to say. They have the right to do that.
Well, they went inside, and Don Lemon went inside the church, and he asked the pastor questions. I didn't see him blocking anybody. I watched the live stream. That's also a video that's live streamed. So I got to see with my own eyes.
He's not being charged for asking the pastor questions.
Yes, they're saying that he obstructed their right to
Right.
worship. How?
By
I saw him.
stopping a woman
I
from
watched him. Oh, the one woman.
Well, all the protesters
How?
there. The second the
protesters
guy
are the
says you have to
protesters.
leave, the
He was
protesters
reporting
and Don
the
Lemon
news.
aren't separate. It's not separate.
It is.
There's no.
It is. He had a camera reporting the news, asking.
That's
questions.
in
He
the
wasn't
Constitution it says
obstructing.
if you have a camera, you can do whatever
No, he
you want on
wasn't
private property. I
obstructing.
missed that
He wasn't-
clause in
he
the
wasn't-
First Amendment.
He wasn't obstructing. He's asking questions in there and recording it. He's asking why the pastor is also the head of the local
I'm
ICE
gonna
chapter.
storm into your house, Lindsay, and I'm just asking questions.
Well, the house of
I'm
the
a
Lord.
journalist.
The house of the Lord welcomes everyone, right? All welcome in the house of the Lord. So he's not
As soon
unwelcome
as they
there.
say you're not welcome here anymore, you have to leave. They have to shut up and leave.
Okay,
They
you
can
know
do
this is
that.
an unwarranted case. And
No, I don't
it's gonna
know
blow
that.
up in President Trump's face.
I genuinely
And it's
don't
an
know that.
embarrassing moment for our country, and I really hope
think
that
it's
he
an
would just drop it. It
embarrassing moment.
is
Embarrassing
because
moment
he's
for Don
prosecuting
Lemon.
everyone that he doesn't like, and so it's just like
No,
it's
he's prosecuting trespassers.
No, he's prosecuting every single person that he doesn't like. The president is. I mean, we're going to talk later about Trevor Noah. He's prosecuting everyone he doesn't like.
He's all right. Well, there is a look. I am not saying I don't know. I need to see what the evidence shows, and if they just charged him with trespassing, that would be obviously valid. Would you agree that if you charged with trespassing, that was valid? You're right. I don't know if his actions meet the definition under this FACE Act, which is a more serious designation. I don't know. I'll need to see the evidence. He's clearly trespassing. Now that's a slap on the wrist, and that's not what
People
they're doing.
are allowed with a camera into a house of worship, so we'll see what happens.
Nobody is allowed anywhere without the permission of the person
What do you
who
mean?
runs
Churches
the thing.
open doors. There's no trespassing
And
sign
then
on
as
a
soon as
church
they say
doors.
you have to leave, you'd have to leave because it's not your property.
Robby, what is on your radar?
Well, ProPublica has confirmed the names of the 2 immigration enforcement agents who shot and killed Alex Preddy. And their identities might be surprising to many liberals who are forming their impressions about border control and ICE from Democratic talking heads on cable news. I'm speaking, of course, about progressive pundit Tiffany Cross, for one, who appeared on CNN last week and expressed confidence that one of the reasons we're seeing all of this aggressive action from ICE is that a significant number of Proud Boys, that's the far-right militia group, actually joined up with ICE. She also said a bunch of things that were obviously untrue, but let's just stick to that one. Now, nobody wants Proud Boys in law enforcement. It's a fringe, conspiracy-oriented group tied with the militia movement and, indeed, white nationalism and other unsavory elements. Indeed, the alleged white supremacy of immigration enforcement has become a major talking point for the left. Here was leftist writer Ta-Nehisi Coates making the case that Trump is building a white supremacist army in terms of the staffing of federal agencies and federal law enforcement.
I don't know that I've seen before the president of the United States attempt to build what I can only call a white supremacist army within the government, one that will outlast him. That is new. And I don't know what else to call it, given the propaganda and the recruiting that I don't know what else what anybody else would want me to say.
For liberals, it can never just be that they disagree with a policy or think a policy is bad. The policy must also be racist to its core. White nationalist, even. Well, I've buried the lead here. Are you ready to learn the names of the white nationalist Border Patrol agents who killed Alex Preddy? Their names are, drumroll please, Jesus Ochoa and Raimundo Gutierrez. Ochoa and Gutierrez, the alleged white supremacists. Well, lest you still think these were Proud Boys who rushed to join law enforcement in recent weeks in order to heed Trump's call and work to bring fascism to the United States, note that Ochoa has been with Border Patrol since 2018 and Gutierrez since 2014, so much for that idea. Now look, I'm being contemptuous of the idea that there's always and necessarily some racist motivation because this is the liberal media's preferred lens for attacking issues. So many in the media see Trump's stepped-up immigration enforcement as white people versus people of color. But of course, there are plenty of black and also Latino members of law enforcement, have been historically. Hispanics' views on immigration generally track the public at large. They aren't especially obsessed with keeping as many illegal immigrants in the country as possible. Even legal immigrants feel this way. Even illegal immigrants feel this way. There's a long history of this country of the most recent migrant waves wanting to shut the door firmly behind them. Now, that doesn't mean we have to agree with this particular form of law enforcement of our immigration laws, nor should we rule that an investigation isn't necessary to determine what happened in the Preddy case. Obviously, we should investigate. Prejudging this shooting as justified because Preddy was a domestic terrorist, as so many in the administration did, I think that's absolutely wrong, as I've said so. So I was glad, and I'm firmly with him, to see Senator Rand Paul, my favorite senator, make the point that there ought to be an independent investigation and that the administration ought to answer questions about what standards they are using. Here was Paul on 60 Minutes.
I saw no evidence. I saw a man that was retreating. I mean, he went to the middle of the street. He didn't even obstruct traffic. He let a car go through. As the agents advanced on him, he retreated to the side of the street. A woman is violently pushed to the ground, and he turns to help her, and that's when he is grabbed from behind. I saw no evidence of him assaulting the police.
Paul has called for top immigration enforcement authorities to testify before his committee on their tactics and their use of force. He is skeptical, for now, that ICE needs even more funding. Recall that the One Big Beautiful Bill, the Trump administration's signature piece of legislation, found billions more of your dollars to spend on the feds. At the very least, the American people should demand to know that the money is being spent wisely on law enforcement agencies that can be trusted to get the job done while protecting our civil liberties. And that is key. Hello, Niall.
Well, I mean, let me, as we ease our way back into our reunion, begin with the point that I do agree with you on, which is Rand Paul. I think that Rand Paul, whether I agree with him across the board or not, is beside the point. Rand Paul does have a consistent set of beliefs and principles that he, by and large, sticks with. And I think he stuck with them there in that 60 Minutes clip that you played. And I think that's important. The reason, beyond just acknowledging that I mention it, is the The point here, surely, which we need not to get distracted from, is that in the case of both Alex Pretty and Renee Good, masked agents of the government shot dead American citizens on the street. That, whether one is libertarian, liberal, or anything else, has to be a cause of outrage or, at a minimum, concern. Now, to the point about these guys' names being revealed, it is notable that those names were not revealed by the government or by any investigatory body. They were revealed by ProPublica.
Right.
I would argue that it is in the interests of all of us as just people in this nation writ large, that if government agents shoot somebody dead, we should know their names. That seems a very low baseline to get over, which was not got over in this case. And then just finally, because obviously I want to leave you time to rebut this, but I mean, I have, for example, have never made the argument that it is racial animus in the case of Pretty or in the case of the shooting dead of Renee Good. It is, I think, the argument is about abuse of state power and that power having been used in a way that many people find abusive, there to be apparent impunity for doing so.
Well, sure, and I also object to abuses of state power. I think in the discourse, in the discussion of this, I encounter not you, but liberals who, for which issues of racial justice and racism became the only framework by which you could engage with police abuses over the last 10 or 15 years, say. I think that's been an unhelpful framing, frankly, to apply to police issues because it has estranged those of us of a libertarian inclination on the right from people on the left who would also object to these things on the basis of government should not do this to its citizens, and made it a more fraught and it gets into issues of wokeness and political correctness when it's just about race. In some cases, ignorant of the actual facts that people of color sign up to be law enforcement agents, and that the only reason, I think there's, again, not you, I'm stereotyping a specific kind of liberal who imagines that the only person who would sign up to do this kind of work is someone who harbors racial animus toward Latino people and black people, which is not the case.
Right. Well, I wish this was one of our unlimited discussions where we could have a 20-minute thing. One thing I would say is the presence of people of color in a law enforcement or immigration enforcement agency does not in itself absolve that structure of racism or racial disparity. I mean, in apartheid South Africa, there were quite a lot of black police officers. It didn't make apartheid any less racist than it actually is. So these are, I think, complicated issues in many ways.
They are complicated. But anyway, we do absolutely agree with you. No disagreement. There needs to be an investigation of these issues. It shouldn't be different rules for these law enforcement officers versus the local police. Again, Rand has made this point. So many others have. Yes, in the case of a totally justified shooting where a local police officer kills someone, there will still be an investigation every single time, virtually every single time, to determine whether that was lawful, authorized use of force. We want that as citizens. It's not a poor reflection on the police officer. It can be completely justified, but you will learn the name and it will be investigated, and we can't have a different standard for the national enforcement.
I agree with that, very much so. What is in your radar?
Well, Europe's war on American tech companies is heating up. French authorities raided the headquarters of X in that country and have summoned Elon Musk and former X CEO Linda Yaccarino to speak with the police. This is a serious escalation of European governments' efforts to compel Musk and the leaders of other social media companies to fall in line and to handle speech and tech the way it's handled in Europe. Namely, very little formal protection for free expression and consequently very little innovation in the tech sector. Pavel Durov, founder of Telegram, slammed France on X, saying France is the only country in the world that is criminally persecuting all the social networks that give people some degree of freedom. Telegram, X, TikTok. Don't be mistaken, this is not a free country. Durov knows from personal experience he was previously detained in France due to content that appeared on Telegram. It's concerning. Now, the charges against X, according to the New York Times, are that X's AI system, Grok, is not taking sufficient steps to combat misinformation, to combat racism, and also that it's allowing for the generation of child sexual abuse images. Now, that last accusation is extremely serious, of course, and it's perfectly good for proper for law enforcement to ensure that social media giants are taking reasonable steps to suppress such content and, more importantly, to hold to account the people who create such content. And that's key because, look, make no mistake, it is people, it's human beings who are ultimately responsible, not Grok itself, not Elon Musk, but the individuals who issue the commands to the AI to make such images. Grok is just a tool. If you take an inappropriate picture of an underage person, you are the guilty party, not the camera you use, not the person that invented the camera. If you say something defamatory about someone, or if you make violent threats over the phone, let's say, the criminal is you. It's not the phone company. This is obvious in so many other contexts, but for some reason, AI is making it so that many otherwise reasonable people sound foolish. Artificial intelligence is a glorified search engine. It's not alive. It's not thinking for itself. It's not making decisions. It is responding to the inputs you give it. Certainly, we need to impose guardrails to stop it from generating images that violate the law. I don't think anyone is against that. But we also need to stop ascribing motivations to the AI itself when it has none. Moreover, we should be sensitive of the fact that what governments all over the world really want to do is come up with excuses to harm innovation and regulate speech. Because it isn't just France. Here, for instance, was the president of Spain at the World Government Summit in Dubai this week.
This means that CEOs of these techno platforms will face criminal liability for failing to remove illegal or hateful content. And for that, we governments need to stop turning a blind eye to the toxic content shared under their watch. Second, we will turn algorithmic manipulation and amplification of illegal content into a new criminal offense. Disinformation doesn't appear by itself. It is created, promoted, and spread by certain actors. We will go after them as well as after the platforms whose algorithms amplify the disinformation for profit.
Misinformation, hate speech. In other words, speech the government thinks is misinformation, that the government thinks is hateful. That could be speech that is critical of illegal immigration, or that's critical of China's role in causing the COVID pandemic, or that opposes Western foreign policy in the Middle East. Spain also plans, by the way, to ban access to social media for everyone under the age of 16. Think about that. The government wants to control very directly the access your children have to information, what platforms they can use, what websites they can access. How can we set ourselves up to have an informed society of educated and well-socialized young people, ready to choose our leaders, if we don't trust young people to use social media until they're 16? It's frankly crazy to me. By the way, there's no evidence whatsoever that young people are extra susceptible to false or hateful information on social media, and if anything, it's the opposite, i.e., if you are super worried about people encountering and failing for lies on social media, you would probably prohibit the elderly from using it, not young people. Now, that idea would be ridiculous, of course, because it is not and should not be the government's job to decide what information you are allowed to see. That's true in America, and if Europe wants America to keep coming to their rescue, then it should be true in their countries as well. No, Niall loves my digs at Europe.
A little bit of a jab in at the end. So, in all our conversations, I feel like this is one of our biggest and most persistent divisions. And in relation to, first of all, the specific case about XAI and Grok and all of that, the issue under consideration primarily is the propensity of people to use Grok in a way that they were not able to use other comparable services to undress people, and including minors in some instances. Now,
illegal and should be.
Right.
Yes.
Now, the issue there is why, from accounts that I have read of this, Grok, while that was able to occur, soared up the popularity charts in terms of apps in a way that other comparable services did not. Those other comparable services had apparently had the foresight to, in some coding fashion, stop what you could do on Grok from occurring when you used their services. That seems a completely reasonable thing for them to do. The failure to do it seems a serious failure on Grok's part, and therefore I think that it is perfectly valid for it to be investigated.
I think the enforcement should be on the people who use it or misuse it in that way. I mean, this is a question, by the way, in the American context, the rules are different in Europe, that we will have to answer to some degree, probably with new regulation, because under our existing tech law, it is not clear who bears responsibility for AI-generated content. I think the argument should be, again, that it's the user, because we treat speech on social media as not the social media platform's responsibility, but broadly the responsibility of the person who creates it. You can't sue Twitter for Niall's defamatory comments. You have to sue Niall. So I think it should work that way, but it's not clear in the law, so we have to change it. I wonder what you think, though, about this. You don't see any concerns here about them just wanting to stop young people, for instance, from consuming content that they politically think is, like, to speak to the war on Gaza or something like that, very popular subject on TikTok. U.S. wanted to get TikTok out of American shores. They're going to ban social media access for everyone under 16. I mean, it seems crazy to me to think that 15-year-olds who are going to be voting for president or prime minister or whatever in 3 years shouldn't have basically unfiltered access, or at least access maybe filtered by what their parents think, but filtered by what the government thinks. It's crazy to me.
When it comes to things like TikTok or X, for that matter, my concern is more about the actual proprietors of those companies leaning on things or putting a thumb on the scales in some way. I would say, as far as the bans on young people using social media is concerned, Australia is one of the big examples of that. Public support in Australia for that ban was enormous. Like, polls were measuring the pro-ban sentiment at like 75-80%. I think that speaks to a fear that, in fact, far from socializing people, as I think your argument is, that there was a fear that it was, in fact, warping adolescent and pre-adolescent people's sense of the world and themselves and their own body image and all of that.
Well, maybe I'm out on a limb by myself. I just think we're going to come to regret this knee-jerk anti-tech fervor that is taking hold.
Nothing wrong with being out on a limb by yourself. Happens to me quite often. Robby, kick us off. What is on your radar?
Well, I have some things to say about the Epstein files, and you might not like it. In fact, I'm guessing this might be the most unpopular radar I've ever done on Rising. Nevertheless, I think it needs to be said. So bear with me. On Wednesday, Variety published this headline: J.K. Rowling denies inviting Jeffrey Epstein to Harry Potter and the Cursed Child Broadway opening. DOJ docs show he was turned away at the door. One wonders why the editors decided they needed the first part of that, which is accusatory in tone, even though the second part acquits her entirely. Luckily for Rowling, the new information made available as part of the federal government's mandatory Epstein files disclosure, 3 million pages, becoming available last Friday, it actually knocks down this particular smear campaign. But here's my question. What if Epstein, a schemer and a charlatan whose entire shtick was worming his way into the company of rich and famous people for the purposes of manipulating and or blackmailing them, what if he had somehow snuck into the show? If the response to this latest batch of Epstein files is any indication, I think Rowling would have been referred to as one of those notable names brought down by the Epstein files, guilty by insinuation of complicity in the most infamous sexual predator's appalling crimes. Rowling, of course, is already persona non grata among progressives, owing to her views on transgender issues, which are perfectly mainstream but toxically unpopular among the left. But that is the problem. The Epstein files are becoming an exercise in axe grinding among partisan actors and knee-jerk critics of the class of people who found themselves in Epstein's orbit, i.e. wealthy entrepreneurs, academics, the chattering class, etc. This is not to excuse, by the way, the appalling judgment of those who consciously and deliberately continued to court Epstein's favor even after the full extent of his depravity was well known. The such figures do include Bill Gates, as we discussed yesterday, Noam Chomsky, Steve Bannon, and Stacey Plaskett. Bannon and Plaskett, in particular, they sought Epstein's political counsel right up until the end of his life. Chomsky gave Epstein advice on beating the charges against him, and Gates is accused of truly despicable behavior, which he denies. They're creeps, and I'm glad we know it. We should stop listening to any of them. But the release of the Epstein files has also meant that millions of documents containing thinly sourced accusations, misleading information, and outright falsehoods are now flooding social media, giving a veneer of confirmation to rumors, gossip, and lies. This is very much by design, since Congress, by a vote of 427 to 1 in the House, opted to disclose everything, including transcripts of investigations and reports that were never deemed truthful in the first place. For example, the latest batch of docs prompted Keith Edwards, a Democratic strategist, to post on X that the claim that Epstein is the one who introduced Donald Trump to Melania, that's now confirmed. That claim is not confirmed just because someone said it and an investigator made note of it does not mean it's true. On the contrary, Donald and Melania have both denied it's true. And the Daily Beast was previously forced to retract the claim because of the official timeline that contradicts it. So here we have a clear case of bad faith political actors weaponizing the Epstein files to tarnish their political enemies, even though the new documents don't prove anything about Trump. Indeed, for partisan figures who've been obsessed with the notion that the Epstein files would demonstrate Trump's complicity in Epstein's sex crimes, the most stunning revelation in my book is that there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Initially, this category did include many of the MAGA faithful, who I think earnestly believed they were about to unmask a global pedophilia ring involving the Clintons. Then more recently, Epstein files disclosure became, well, a Democratic crusade, as it dawned on the liberals that Trump had been friends with Epstein too, perhaps complicit in his crimes. Again, nothing to incriminate Trump, nothing to incriminate the Clintons. It's a big nothing on that front. Sorry if that disappoints you, but it's the truth. Now, it's worth repeating that there is a real monster in the Epstein files. His name is Jeffrey Epstein. He's a vicious sexual predator who abused underage girls. And he's likely not the only one. There are other individuals in his orbit who did reach settlements with accusers. But the Epstein files do not contain a great deal of new evidence of sex crimes among Epstein's friends, associates, and acquaintances. Yet everyone whose name appears in the files is now being treated like an exposed sex criminal. That includes, for instance, hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin, who was in a photo alongside 3 young people, possibly on Epstein's island. On X, high follower accounts cited this photo as evidence Dubin had sexually assaulted those children, who were probably procured for him by Epstein. Except that's not the case at all. You see this photo? Those are his kids in that photo. Come on now. This is becoming a witch hunt mentality. In fact, it's reminiscent in my book of the public panic over sexual misconduct on college campuses throughout the 2010s, in which junk statistics and one-sided journalism helped advance an utterly false notion that elite universities were a hunting ground for young women. The idea that scores of rapists hunted college women, lured them into attics, and attacked them during depraved rituals was the thrust of the infamous Rolling Stone hoax story, which was subsequently debunked by real journalists, including, frankly, me. I was the first journalist to speak up and say I didn't believe the story. Well, I'm speaking up again because the Epstein story has begun to resemble this misguided witch hunt. Moreover, the release of the files could be setting a dangerous precedent. It's incredibly unusual for the federal government to unseal investigative records which contain reports that lack corroboration. This is a very unusual case, and there's certainly an argument to be made that public confidence in the justice system requires disclosure here. But I can't help but consider the statement by Representative Clay Higgins, who was the lone no vote on Epstein disclosure. You know what he said? He wrote this on X. If enacted in its current form, this type of broad reveal of criminal investigative files released to a rabid media will absolutely result in innocent people being hurt. Can anyone say that he was wrong? I can't.
It's an interesting analysis, Robby, and I have sympathy with some of it. I mean, I think that there are dangers of a witch hunt, and we were speaking briefly yesterday when we addressed this topic about the fact that particularly on social media, the circles of knowing that are viewed as incriminating keep getting broader and broader. So now it's almost not people who merely knew Epstein, but people who knew the people who knew Epstein.
And if you put a black box over someone's face in a photo, it just looks incriminating now.
Right.
Doesn't mean anything.
Right. No, that's fair. But I do think that this is an exceptional case, and you made the point about the need for public confidence. So while I wouldn't necessarily favor this approach in certainly like every criminal case in the country, I do think the nature of Epstein, the nature of his various predations, the nature of his position of influence, the nature of the very lenient deal he got when he was first accused of crimes, all of those, I think, augur for a greater level of public disclosure. Now, there can be downsides to public disclosure sometimes. you mentioned the, I don't think you used the word weaponization, but the use of this by partisans of either side. I mean, it is true that partisans are using it. That's not necessarily an argument for the fact that it shouldn't have been done. I mean, partisans use everything, and many of those things are valid. So I was and continue to be in favor of these disclosures, but I don't completely dismiss the witch hunt argument either.
And the way people talk about the Epstein files and what is being revealed on social media, like you raise these points. I mean, I wrote this article for the Free Press the other day, and it's just people screaming at me on social media that I'm covering up for this cabal of pedophiles. And look, it's not my fault. This evidence, these new files, what they do not show is the cabal of people involved. Jeffrey Epstein did that. But people keep saying things like, well, who was he trafficking the girls to? It was him. He was the one who abused the girls. These other people, they might have known about it. They might have unwisely associated with him. They might have been involved in other wrongdoings of a kind. But it sounds like people will think there's still more to uncover until they found evidence that all these other rich and famous people, including the Clintons, if you're MAGA, or Trump, if you're Democrats, were raping children, and they're not going to find evidence of that. And I don't, like, that's a religious belief at this point, that evidence is out there.
There's certainly among some people an appetite that will never be satisfied, and they will always think there's something beyond this. But to your point about, like, it just being Epstein, I mean, there is somewhere in these files a version of the initial indictment that does have co-conspirators, but has their names blacked out, I believe. So that in itself does imply that there is some broader circle here of people who, at least in a definite, specific, alleged way, were involved in this. We just don't know who they are.
It was alleged. People made accusations. Those people received settlements. Those might have been I don't doubt that other people could have done something wrong, but I think the way people discuss the Epstein files has come to be about, again, this broader sexual predator behavior, also ensnaring our political leaders. I mean, it's had more of an effect on British political leaders, but correct me if I'm wrong, how this brought down Mandelson, right? That's his name?
Yeah.
Is that he was sharing state secrets or
in fact, he was sharing incredibly sensitive information. He also seems to have, well, allegedly there was money sent from Epstein both to Mandelson's husband for some course of osteopathy and to Mandelson himself. Mandelson, of course, can try to refute that if he wishes, but it's the business links and the disclosure of sensitive information. The problem.
All very bad, deserves his fall. But even that is not what is discussed either, that he was receiving sexual favors with little girls is not at all what is alleged here.
Not at all.
I think that's revealing and is a little bit being lost in this conversation.
Fair enough.